Welcome to today's story, a journey where English is more than grammar and words. It's a window into real lives, deep emotions, and unforgettable people. Today, we met a man who shook the world with just his voice. Not a king, not a soldier, but a storyteller. His name was Orson Welles. He was bold. He was curious. He asked questions no one dared to ask. He told stories that made people stop, listen, and sometimes even panic. Before he was famous, before Citizen Kane, before Hollywood, he was just a boy with big ideas and a heart full of imagination. But life was not easy. He lost what he loved. He felt the weight of the world too early. He didn't always know where he belonged. Still, he never stopped dreaming. He turned fear into power. He turned silence into voice. And that voice changed cinema, radio, and storytelling forever. This is not just a story of a movie director. It's a story of finding courage in chaos, of rising when the world expects you to fall, of speaking, even when others try to silence you. So as you listen, don't just focus on learning English. Let your heart listen, too, because today, you don't just learn a language. You learn about Orson Welles, and you learn how one voice can echo through history. Let's begin. Orson Welles was born on May 6, 1915, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, into a world of contradictions. His father, Richard Welles, was an inventor and businessman with an adventurous spirit, while his mother, Beatrice Ives Wells, was a concert pianist and suffragist, a cultured, intellectual woman who introduced Orson to the arts early. By age 2, Orson was recognized as a child prodigy. He read Shakespeare, painted, and played the piano. But tragedy struck young. His mother died when he was 9, and his father, unable to cope with the loss in his own alcoholism, died when Orson was 15. Left an orphan, Orson found sanctuary in the arms of his guardian, Dr. Maurice Bernstein, and later in the prestigious Todd School for Boys in Illinois. There, he immersed himself in literature, theater, and radio, seeds that would soon grow into a genius that redefined 20th century storytelling. At just 16, Orson traveled to Europe under the pretense of studying painting. In Ireland, he lied about his age and talked his way into the Gate Theatre in Dublin, where he began acting professionally. This experience became foundational, not just artistically, but psychologically. Orson learned that charisma, voice, and confidence could open any door. The world became a stage, and Welles was ready to perform. He returned to the U.S. with a taste for drama and grandeur, writing a book on Shakespeare at 19 and briefly studying at Harvard and Chicago. But academia couldn't contain him. He was a man destined for spotlights and microphones. The mid-1930s saw Welles explode onto the American scene. At just 20, he joined the Federal Theater Project, where his reimagined Macbeth with an all-black cast and Harlem stunned critics. Bold, political, and artistic, it cemented his reputation. In 1937, with producer John Houseman, he co-founded the Mercury Theater, which brought Shakespeare to radio and stage in brilliant new ways. At 23, Welles had mastered 2 mediums, theater and radio. Then came October 30th, 1938, the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast. Using faux news reports, Welles convinced thousands that Martians were invading Earth. The broadcast caused panic and catapulted Welles to national fame overnight. Hollywood noticed. RKO offered Orson Welles an unprecedented contract, full creative control to write, direct, produce, and star in films. He was only 25. His first film was to become the most talked about in cinema history, Citizen Kane. Released in 1941, Kane was a stunning narrative revolution. Non-linear storytelling, deep focus cinematography, dramatic lighting, and symbolic complexity. Techniques now common were then groundbreaking. The film was loosely based on newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst, who tried to bury it. Though Kane wasn't a box office hit, it was critically hailed. Welles had arrived as cinema's terrible. But the war was brewing, not just in Europe, but in the studios of Hollywood. Welles' follow-up, The Magnificent Ambersons, was butchered by the studio while he was in Brazil filming a government-backed documentary project. His reputation as a difficult genius grew. He directed other powerful works, The Stranger, The Lady from Shanghai, and Macbeth, but increasingly lost studio support. His artistic independence clashed with Hollywood's need for profit. Studios re-edit, shortened, or shelved his projects. By the late 1940s, Welles was becoming a legend whose wings had been clipped. He moved to Europe, where he continued directing on shoestring budgets, surviving off acting roles, narration work, and small paychecks. Welles spent much of the next 2 decades in self-imposed exile. In Italy, France, and Spain, he created independent films such as Othello, 1951, and The Trial, 1962, which, though brilliant, were plagued by budget issues. He played supporting roles in films like The Third Man and became a familiar figure on television, game shows, and even wine commercials. These appearances funded his passion projects. Yet, he remained haunted by the myth of Kane. He was often seen as a fallen star, a tragic artist too bold for Hollywood. But in truth, Welles never stopped creating. His unfinished projects, Don Quixote, The Other Side of the Wind, became legends in their own right. Welles's later years were spent juggling interviews, narration gigs, and attempting to finish The Other Side of the Wind, a film he began in 1970 about a fading director, eerily mirroring his own story. He appeared on talk shows, most notably The Merv Griffin Show, where he revealed humor, vulnerability, and profound sadness. His charisma was undiminished, but the Hollywood machine had long moved on. On October 10th, 1985, Orson Welles died of a heart attack at his Los Angeles home. He was 70. On the desk beside him lay the typewritten pages of another unfinished script. Orson Welles is now regarded not only as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, but as a revolutionary across theater, radio, and film. Citizen Kane frequently tops greatest films ever made lists. His deep voice echoes through film history. His boldness inspired generations, from Scorsese to Spielberg to Christopher Nolan. Welles's life was a tragedy and a triumph. He scaled artistic heights early and fell into exile, yet never surrendered his vision. He once said, "We're born alone, we live alone, we die alone. Only through our love and friendship can we create the illusion for the moment that we're not alone." In that spirit, Orson Welles still lives. In his stories, his style, and in the stubborn brilliance that dares to challenge the world. To understand Orson Welles' legacy, one must explore his lifelong war with the institutions he sought to master. Welles was never content to simply participate. He aimed to revolutionize. But revolution, even in art, comes with enemies. One of his fiercest battles was with RKO Pictures after Citizen Kane. Though the studio had granted him creative freedom, the backlash from Hearst's empire pressured executives to distance themselves. Welles' next project, The Magnificent Ambersons, fell victim to panic. As Welles was out of the country, Arco heavily re-edited the film, cut 40 minutes, and even res-hot the ending. Welles called it the greatest heartbreak of his life. Then came It's All True, a semi-documentary about Latin America, meant to support the U.S. wartime good neighbor policy. Welles believed in it deeply. But budget issues, political complications, and studio apathy doomed the project. It was never finished in his lifetime. These betrayals shaped him. Welles began to distrust producers, distributors, and even audiences. He once remarked, "I started at the top and worked my way down." Yet, every failure hardened his commitment to independence. He financed his later films with earnings from narration work and commercial appearances. In one iconic moment, he advertised Paul Masson wine with the unforgettable line, "We will sell no wine before it's time." Though mocked, these ads helped fund his creative projects. Behind Orson Welles' booming voice and commanding presence was a man driven by deep emotional undercurrents, particularly in love. His personal life was marked by intense, often chaotic relationships that paralleled the drama of his artistic career. His first wife, Virginia Nicholson, was a Chicago socialite whom he married in 1934. They had a daughter, Christopher Welles, but the relationship couldn't withstand Welles's rising fame and relentless ambition. They divorced in 1940. Shortly after, he began a passionate and turbulent relationship with actress Rita Hayworth. Their 1943 marriage was Hollywood's most glamorous affair, a union of genius and beauty. Yet, despite mutual love and admiration, they lived in different worlds. Welles later said, "She wanted to be adored, not understood." Their marriage dissolved in 1947, but Welles always called her the love of my life. Later in life, Welles found companionship with Paola Mori, an Italian aristocrat and actress, whom he married in 1955. They had a daughter, Beatrice Welles, and remained legally married until his death, although Welles lived much of his later life with Oja Kodar, a Croatian actress and artist who became his muse, lover, and collaborator. Oja was more than a romantic partner. She co-wrote scripts, starred in his later films, and helped fund projects like The Other Side of the Wind. In many ways, she represented the final phase of Welles's creative life, a return to guerrilla filmmaking, passion projects, and artistic freedom, even if it meant working in obscurity. Love for Welles was never simple. It was entangled with his creative process, his ego, his longing for beauty and understanding. Like the characters he portrayed and created, he was often distant, elusive, and tragic in his yearning. In 1970, Orson Welles began work on what he believed would be his triumphant return to Hollywood. It was to be a brutal satire, a cinematic confessional, and a final reckoning all in one. The Other Side of the Wind. The story followed Jake Hannaford, a fading film director attempting to revive his career in a new Hollywood dominated by youth nudity and anti-establishment rebellion. Hannaford was a thinly veiled version of Welles himself, an aging genius grappling with his own obsolescence, mocked by the system he once defied. The film's structure was revolutionary, told through fake documentaries, party footage, filmed within the film sequences, and fragmented dialogue. It was as if Citizen Kane had been reimagined for the 1970s underground. It was raw, experimental, and utterly ahead of its time. But The Other Side of the Wind was cursed from the beginning. The financing was a labyrinth of private backers, Iranian investors, including relatives of the Shah, and endless IOUs. When the Iranian Revolution erupted, the film's negative was seized and locked in a Paris vault. Legal entanglements froze the project for decades. Welles worked on it obsessively until his death in 1985. He edited by hand, spliced scenes together in hotel rooms, cut footage with his longtime cinematographer Gary Graver, and constantly rewrote scenes with Ojah Kodar. Yet the film was never finished. It became a symbol of Welles himself, visionary, incomplete, misunderstood. For over 40 years, The Other Side of the Wind remained cinema's great phantom. Then, in 2018, thanks to a team of Welles loyalists, producer Frank Marshall, director Peter Bogdanovich, who also starred in the film, editor Bob Murawski, and Netflix, the film was finally completed using Welles's notes, footage, and scripts. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival and was released on Netflix, allowing Welles's final vision to be seen by the world at last. The result was messy, brilliant, and deeply moving, a cinematic time capsule, decades ahead of its era. Critics saw it as a long-lost letter from a ghost of cinema, speaking directly to modern audiences about art, ego, failure, and legacy. With The Other Side of the Wind, Welles had the last word, posthumously completing a film about unfinished lives. Orson Welles did not simply make movies. He redefined what movies could be. Long after his death, his fingerprints remain on every frame of bold cinema. From the camera movements of Martin Scorsese, to the nonlinear storytelling of Christopher Nolan, to the stylized visuals of David Fincher, Welles gave filmmakers permission to dream recklessly. His influence is not confined to techniques. It's in the defiance of studios, in the belief that art should be visionary, even if it never pays, in the romantic idea that the director is an artist, not just a craftsman. Citizen Kane is now a rite of passage in film schools. But beyond Kane, Welles' spirit lives in films that challenge audiences, in stories that dare be incomplete, and in creators who build kingdoms with no safety net. He taught the world that ambition was not arrogance. It was courage. Orson Welles died at 70, broke, exiled, and in many ways forgotten by the industry he once ruled. But legends are not made in moments of wealth or power. They are forged in the spaces between defiance and despair. He once said, "Create your own visual style. Let it be unique for yourself and yet identifiable for others." And that is exactly what he did. Today, Orson Welles is more than a filmmaker. He is an idea, a voice that reminds artists not to compromise, not to wait for permission, and never let the world shrink their dreams. The boy genius, the Hollywood maverick, the exile, the phantom, the legend. Orson Welles never truly finished his work, but his work will never be finished.
If you enjoy the video, please like, subscribe, and share.